The Promise. Under the stars. The night was quiet on the frontier colony. A soft wind moved through the dry fields, carrying the smell of dust and metal. The colony was small, built on a world claimed by both humans and alien traders, a place where power decided who lived free and who lived as slaves. A young human boy named Daniel often wandered outside the colony walls. He was 12 years old, curious and restless. He did not like the way the merchants treated the alien slaves who were brought in chains. He would watch silently as they were sold, their eyes empty and afraid. But one evening, something different caught his attention. Among the slaves brought that day was a young alien girl. She looked his age, her skin pale with faint glowing patterns that shifted when she was scared. Her thin wrists were tied, and her eyes were large pools of fear. Daniel felt something stir inside him. Not pity alone, but a sense of injustice he could not explain. He followed quietly as the traders dragged the slaves to their pens. The girl stumbled and fell, but no one helped her. The crowd only laughed. Daniel waited until the guards moved away. Then he crept close to the wooden fence where she sat on the ground, hugging her knees. "Are you hurt?" Daniel whispered. The girl lifted her head slowly. Her eyes widened in surprise. She had never heard kindness spoken to her in this place. "I am fine," she whispered back. Though her voice trembled, "What is your name?" Daniel asked. The girl hesitated, looking around as if saying it was forbidden. "Leora," she finally said. Her voice was soft like music. Daniel smiled. "I am Daniel." They spoke in whispers. Daniel asked how long she had been a slave. She shook her head, saying she did not remember freedom. Her family had been taken when she was very small. Listening to her words, Daniel's chest tightened. He could not understand why people would chain a child. As the sun set, the colony lights flickered on. Daniel knew he had to go home, but his feet would not move. He looked at her once more. Leora's face was pale in the dim light. Her glowing patterns dimmed as if her spirit was fading. Daniel clenched his fists. "Listen," he said firmly. "One day, when we are older, I will marry you." Leora blinked in shock. She thought she had misheard him. "What?" she whispered. Daniel's eyes were steady. His voice shook but carried truth. "I promise you, I will marry you, and you will never be a slave again." For a long moment, Leora said nothing, her eyes filled with tears. No one had ever promised her anything before. No one had ever looked at her as if she was more than chains. "Do you mean it?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Yes," Daniel said. "I mean it." Above them, the night sky stretched wide. Stars burned like silver fire. Both children stared upward, as if the stars themselves had heard the vow. In that moment, Leora felt warmth in her chest, something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. But even as the promise was made, danger stirred around them. A guard's heavy steps echoed close. Daniel quickly pulled back from the fence. "I have to go," he whispered. "But remember my words." Leora nodded, clutching the memory as tightly as she held her breath. Daniel ran through the dark fields back to his home. His heart pounded. He had no plan, no way to fight the cruel world around them. Yet he carried the vow inside him like a secret flame. He did not know how, but one day he would keep it. That night, as he lay in his small bed, Daniel could not sleep. The stars through his window seemed to watch him. He repeated his words over and over until they became part of him. He did not know that across the colony walls, Leora also lay awake, whispering the promise to herself. Her tears fell quietly, but for the first time, they were tears of hope and not only sorrow. The colony slept, but two young hearts beat with the rhythm of destiny. A promise had been made under the stars, a promise too bold for a child, too dangerous for a slave, yet strong enough to outlast fear. In the silence of the night, a story had begun, one that would echo across years, across worlds, and perhaps even across the galaxy. The girl taken away. The morning sun rose over the colony, painting the dusty horizon with pale light. Daniel woke up early, his mind still full of the promise he had made under the stars. The memory of Leora's eyes, filled with tears but also with hope, refused to leave him. He hurried through his chores, barely touching his breakfast. His parents noticed his strange mood but said nothing. For them, the world was too harsh to waste time on childish dreams. Yet Daniel was not thinking of dreams. He was thinking of a vow that had already begun to shape his life. By mid-morning, the traders returned to the square with their slaves. Daniel slipped away from home and ran to the market, weaving through the crowd until he reached the same wooden pens. His heart pounded as his eyes searched. At first, he feared she was gone, but then he saw her, Leora, sitting quietly near the fence, her glowing patterns dim in the daylight. But her presence still unmistakable, relief washed over him. He wanted to run to her, to speak again, but guards were close this time. He had to stay back all day. He lingered at the edges of the crowd, watching as merchants argued about prices and buyers inspected the slaves like animals. His fists clenched every time someone pointed at Leora. He prayed silently that no one would buy her. His stomach twisted with fear. What if she was taken away? What if his promise was stolen from him before it could ever mean anything? The hours dragged on, and the crowd began to thin. Then it happened. A tall alien nobleman, dressed in fine robes, stepped forward with 2 guards behind him. His cold eyes swept over the slaves until they stopped on Leora. Daniel's heart dropped. The man pointed at her and spoke in a language Daniel could not fully understand, but the meaning was clear. The merchant nodded eagerly. Smiling at the price, Leora was sold. Daniel's breath caught. He wanted to scream, to run forward and fight, but his body froze. Fear held him back. He was only a boy, and the guards were armed. He could do nothing but watch as the nobleman's guards unlocked the gate and dragged Leora out. She struggled for a moment, but the grip of their hands was too strong. Daniel's chest ached with helplessness. Their eyes met across the crowd. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Leora looked at him with terror and sorrow. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He wanted to shout, to tell her again that he would keep his promise. But the words died on his lips. The guards pushed her forward, forcing her toward a waiting transport. Daniel took a step, then another. His legs moved without thought. He tried to follow, weaving through the people. His heart raced. Leora! He shouted. His voice broke in desperation. She turned her head as the guards pushed her up the ramp. Her glowing patterns flickered faintly as if responding to his call. Daniel's voice carried through the square. "I will find you. I promise." His words echoed, loud and raw. For an instant, the nobleman turned his head with irritation. The crowd murmured at the boldness of a human child. Then the transport doors closed. A hiss of engines filled the air. Daniel pushed through the last line of people, his chest burning, but he was too late. The ship lifted slowly from the ground, dust swirling around its base. He raised his hand as if to pull it back by will alone. His eyes stung with tears. The promise under the stars now felt like a cruel knife twisting in his heart. As the ship disappeared into the sky, Daniel stood frozen. His body trembled, not from weakness but from the fire building inside him. Around him, the crowd began to disperse. Uncaring, for them, this was nothing new, just another day of trade. But for Daniel, it was the day that defined him, the day he realized how powerless he was, and how much he would need to grow to change anything. He walked back home in silence. His hands were clenched so tight his knuckles ached. His parents scolded him for vanishing all day, but he barely heard them. That night he lay awake again, staring at the same stars. This time the stars felt cruel, distant, uncaring. Yet he whispered the promise once more. "I will find you, Leora," his voice cracked. But he forced the words out. "I will keep my vow." Tears slipped down his face. His chest ached with loss, but deep inside, a new seed was planted. Not just hope, but determination. He realized that keeping his promise would not be easy. He would need strength, knowledge, and courage. He would have to rise above the helpless child he was. Only then could he face the world that had stolen her from him. The stars blinked overhead, silent witnesses to a boy's grief and vow. Somewhere out there, Leora was alone, scared, and trapped once more. But Daniel clung to the memory of her eyes, to the trembling voice that asked if he truly meant his words. He had meant them then, and he meant them now. No matter how many years it took, no matter how many worlds he had to cross, he would keep his promise, and though he did not know it, Leora, carried far away into the unknown, whispered the same vow to herself in the dark. Her chains were heavy, but in her heart one fragile light remained, the promise made under the stars. The boy becomes a man. Years passed like the slow turning of the seasons, and the colony changed little. But Daniel was no longer the restless boy who once whispered a vow under the stars. He grew taller, stronger, and more serious with each year. Yet inside him, the memory of that promise did not fade. It became part of him, shaping every choice he made. He carried it like a hidden flame, unseen by others but burning brightly within as a teenager. Daniel trained in whatever skills he could find. He worked in the colony's workshops, learning to fix machines. He watched the guards train with weapons, and in secret he practiced with sticks and old tools. His friends teased him, saying he was wasting his time, but Daniel did not care. In the back of his mind, he could still see the frightened eyes of the alien girl named Leora, and he knew that one day he would need strength to face the world that had taken her away. At night, he would often sneak outside the colony walls, climbing the small ridges of stone that surrounded the settlement. There, under the endless night sky, he trained his body, running, climbing, and pushing himself until sweat poured from his skin. When exhaustion came, he would lie on his back, staring at the stars, whispering the same words again and again. "I will find you, Leora. I will keep my vow." The stars gave no answer, but repeating the words made his resolve stronger. By the time he reached adulthood, Daniel had gained a reputation. He was not the strongest or the smartest, but he was known for his determination. No matter the task, no matter the difficulty, he never gave up. Farmers respected his work, merchants trusted his repairs, and even guards admired the discipline in his eyes. Yet no one truly understood the fire behind his persistence. They thought he was simply hard-working, but only Daniel knew he was preparing for something greater. Still, the galaxy was wide and dangerous, and Daniel felt the weight of his smallness. He saved every credit he earned, buying old books, stolen datapads, and broken devices from travelers. He taught himself languages, studied maps of trade routes, and learned about the many species that lived beyond the colony. He wanted to be ready for the day he could leave. He wanted to understand the world into which Leora had been taken. Sometimes, late at night, doubt would creep in. He would sit alone, staring at the stars, and wonder if he had been foolish. What if Leora was gone? What if she had been lost to cruelty long ago? What if his promise was nothing but a child's dream? These thoughts clawed at him, yet he always pushed them aside. Even if the galaxy laughed at his vow, even if she no longer remembered him, he could not abandon it. To him, that promise was not just words, it was the meaning of his life. One night, when Daniel was 19, he stood outside the colony wall and watched a ship lift into the sky. He felt the heat of its engines on his face. The sight stirred a storm inside him. He knew his time in the colony was ending. He could not stay in the same place where his vow had been born. He had to go out into the stars. He had to follow the path that might lead him to her. His heart raced at the thought, but his will was firm. The next day, Daniel began to ask questions of passing traders. He learned which ships hired workers, which routes carried slaves, and which worlds were known for rebellion and escape. He listened carefully, piecing together fragments of a puzzle. He found that slavery was still strong in the galaxy, but there were also places of resistance, whispers of freed people who had carved new lives for themselves. Each rumor filled him with both fear and hope. Could Leora have survived? Could she be among the free? Daniel trained harder, worked longer, and saved more. The other colonists thought he was preparing to become a trader himself. They did not know the truth. He was preparing for a journey far greater. He was preparing to leave everything behind for the sake of a promise made long ago. As the years continued, Daniel's body grew into that of a man. His shoulders broad, his hands rough with work, his eyes steady with purpose, but his heart remained tied to the memory of a frightened girl sitting behind a wooden fence, her glowing patterns trembling in fear, and her eyes shining when he gave her hope, That memory never aged, never faded. It lived inside him like a light that refused to die. The colony grew comfortable with his presence, but Daniel felt increasingly restless. He knew he could not spend his whole life there, watching ships rise and fall from the sky. He needed to be among them, to chase the path of the stars. Even if he failed, even if he never found her, he had to try. He owed it to her, and he owed it to himself. On his 21st birthday, Daniel stood once more outside the colony, gazing at the horizon where the sky met the barren land. His heart beat with both fear and excitement. He whispered the vow again. Not like a boy, but like a man ready to carry it into reality. "I will find you, Leora. I will keep my promise." The words were no longer just hope, they were his destiny. And somewhere, far away on another world, Leora stirred in her sleep, the faint glow of her patterns shifting as if her spirit could feel the pull of a promise still alive. Neither of them knew when or how their paths would cross again, but the bond forged under the stars had not weakened. It had only grown stronger with time, waiting for the day when fate would bring them face to face once more. Whispers of a return. The years moved on, and Daniel finally left the colony behind. His heart was heavy when he said farewell to his parents and the land where he had grown up, but the promise in his chest burned stronger than any fear. He boarded a trade ship as a mechanic, offering his strong hands and sharp mind in return for passage across the stars. It was the beginning of a life far from home, a life full of danger, uncertainty, and whispers of hope. The galaxy was vast, larger than Daniel had ever imagined. He traveled from world to world, working hard in shipyards, in markets, and on freighters. Everywhere he went, he listened. He asked quiet questions about slave markets, about escaped prisoners, about a girl with glowing patterns on her skin. Most people laughed at him, telling him he was chasing shadows, but sometimes he caught fragments of stories, rumors of escapees, whispers of resistance groups hiding freed aliens from their masters. Those whispers gave him strength, reminding him that his vow still had a chance to be fulfilled. Years of travel shaped him into a man others respected. He had become skilled with tools, sharp with languages, and steady with weapons. Yet beneath the hardened surface, he remained the boy who once looked through a wooden fence at a frightened girl. Each night, he whispered her name into the stars, Leora, as if the galaxy might carry the sound to her. One night, on a crowded station deep in neutral space, Daniel overheard something that struck him like lightning. A pair of alien merchants were talking in hushed voices at a cantina. They spoke of a mysterious woman who had once been a slave, but now moved among free people with a quiet power. She carried herself like someone touched by destiny, they said, and she was gathering influence among those who wished to end slavery altogether. Daniel froze as he listened. His heart hammered in his chest. Could it be her? Could it be Leora? He dared not interrupt their conversation, but every word fed the flame inside him. The merchants mentioned that she had pale skin marked by faint glowing patterns that shimmered when she spoke. Daniel's breath caught. He gripped the table until his knuckles turned white. It had to be her, after all these years, after all his searching. He finally had more than a rumor. He had a trail, but even with this hope, questions burned in his mind. If it was Leora, who had she become after all this time? Was she the same trembling girl he had once promised to marry? Or had the years of slavery and survival changed her beyond recognition? Would she even remember him, a boy from a colony far away, or would his vow mean nothing to her now? These doubts twisted in him, but he clung to the memory of her eyes, the way she looked at him when he spoke his promise. Days turned into weeks as Daniel followed the faint trail of stories, moving from one world to another, searching for her shadow. Each planet gave him fragments of information, never the full truth. One person said she was seen freeing captives on a mining world. Another claimed she spoke to councils in secret, urging them to take action. Others swore she was only a myth, a symbol invented by the desperate. But Daniel believed, he had to believe. His journey grew dangerous. Slave traders did not like questions being asked. More than once he found himself cornered in alleys. Forced to fight his way out, he bore scars on his arms, reminders of the cost of his vow. Yet each time he faltered, he thought of Leora's face, the promise under the stars, and he rose again, refusing to give in. On one barren world, Daniel came across a group of freed slaves. Their bodies carried the marks of chains, but their eyes carried fire. They spoke of a woman who gave them courage, a woman who told them that freedom was worth any price. Daniel listened with his breath held, and his heart told him it was her. When he asked her name, they shook their heads, saying she never gave it, only that her presence was unforgettable. Daniel left that camp with his spirit on fire. For the first time, he felt that the galaxy was pulling him toward her, not just with vague hope, but with real direction. The whispers had turned into something more, something alive, and deep inside, he knew their paths were drawing closer. Still, with hope came fear. What if she no longer wanted to see him? What if she had forgotten the vow they made as children, spoken in innocence under the stars? What if she had found another path, greater than anything he could offer? These questions haunted him, but they did not stop him, for Daniel understood something now. His vow was not only about marriage, it was about freedom. It was about giving her the life she had once been denied, whether or not she chose to stand by his side. So he kept walking, kept searching. Through strange markets and quiet worlds, each whisper, each rumor brought him closer to a truth he could almost touch. Somewhere out there, the girl he had once promised to marry had become a woman who carried hope for others. Somewhere out there, Leora was alive, and destiny was weaving their paths together once more. And as Daniel looked to the night sky on yet another lonely world, the stars shimmered as if watching him, the same way they had when he first spoke his vow. The promise under the stars had not faded with time. It had only grown stronger, echoing across the years, waiting for the moment when two lives, bound by words too bold for children, would finally meet again. The reunion that shakes worlds. The day of their reunion came not with quiet whispers, but with the noise of a crowded starport. Daniel had followed the trail of rumors for years, moving from system to system, chasing fragments of truth that always seemed just out of reach. Yet this time was different. The station was alive with travelers, merchants, and soldiers. The air thick with the scent of oil and smoke. Ships roared in and out of the hangars, and voices in a dozen languages filled the halls. Daniel had walked through countless stations before, but his heart told him this place was different. He felt a pull, a certainty that destiny had brought him here. He moved carefully through the crowd, his eyes sharp, his body tense. He had learned to blend in, to walk with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged. But inside, his chest pounded with every step. For years he had imagined this moment, dreamed of it, prayed for it. And now the thought struck him again and again. What if she truly was here? What if he was only moments away from seeing her after all these years? Daniel passed a row of market stalls, the voices of traders rising and falling like a storm. And then, at the edge of his sight, he saw her. The moment froze in his mind. A woman stood in the open square, surrounded by a small group of freed aliens who looked to her with reverence. She was tall, graceful, her pale skin glowing faintly with the same shifting patterns he remembered from long ago. The light in those patterns was stronger now, not trembling with fear but steady, like the markings of someone who had endured much and grown stronger from it. For a long moment Daniel could not breathe. His body refused to move, his eyes locked on her, and the years seemed to vanish. He was once again a boy standing by a wooden fence, whispering a promise to a frightened girl. Yet now the girl had become a woman, and the weight of her presence shook him. She was not broken, not lost. She had become something far greater. Leora, he whispered in his mind, afraid to speak her name aloud. Her face was calm as she spoke to those around her. Her voice carried warmth and strength. She moved with the authority of someone who had led others through fire and chains. Daniel watched the way the freed aliens leaned close to listen. The way her words gave them courage. He realized she had become more than just herself. She was a symbol, a beacon for others who still suffered. His hands trembled. Should he approach? What if she did not remember him? What if she had moved on? her life far beyond the promise of 2 children under the stars. The doubts struck him like blades, but he forced himself to step forward. Each stride felt heavy, as if he was carrying the weight of every year since that day. He stopped just a few steps away. The crowd around them blurred, the noise of the starport faded, and all he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat. Leora turned, her glowing patterns shifting as her eyes fell on him. For an instant her expression remained calm, unreadable. But then her breath caught, her voice faltered mid-sentence, and her gaze widened. Daniel's lips parted, his voice rough from years of silence. "Leora," he whispered. Her name felt like fire on his tongue. She stared at him, her eyes shimmering with something deeper than recognition. A storm of emotions crossed her face. Shock, disbelief, fear, and then something else, something fragile yet unbroken. The freed aliens around her looked confused, glancing between them. But neither Daniel nor Leora moved. For them, the galaxy had shrunk to this single moment. Years of pain, years of wandering, years of chains and vows collided in their eyes. Daniel saw the girl he once knew, but also the woman she had become, and both left him breathless. Finally, her lips parted, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "Daniel," she said. His name sounded like a prayer, as if she had carried it with her all these years. The sound of it broke something inside him. He felt the sting of tears but refused to look away. He wanted to speak, to explain, to remind her of the promise, but the words tangled in his throat. Leora took a step closer, her patterns glowing brighter. The crowd whispered. Sensing something powerful in the air, Daniel could see the conflict in her eyes, the battle between the leader she had become and the child who once clutched his words as her only hope. She wanted to be strong, but her voice cracked as she whispered again. "You found me." "I told you I would," Daniel answered. His voice was raw, filled with years of longing and determination. "I made you a promise." The starport seemed to hold its breath. Leora's hands trembled, but her eyes shone with tears. Around them, the freed aliens waited in silence, sensing they were witnessing something greater than themselves. For Daniel, it was not just a reunion. It was the breaking of years of silence, the collision of 2 lives shaped by a single vow. For Leora, it was proof that hope was not foolish, that the boy who once gave her courage had not abandoned her. In that moment, the galaxy shifted, not in wars or councils, but in the quiet meeting of 2 souls who had defied the weight of fate. The boy had become a man, the slave had become a leader, and their paths had finally crossed again. But as their eyes locked, Daniel realized something he had not expected. This was no simple reunion. This was the beginning of something far greater. The promise under the stars had returned, but now it carried the power to shake worlds, the hidden truth. The crowd slowly melted away from the starport square, yet the air still hummed with tension. Daniel and Leora stood facing one another, years of silence stretching between them like an invisible barrier. Daniel felt as though his chest might shatter under the weight of everything he wanted to say. But before he could speak again, Leora raised her hand, a subtle motion that silenced not only him but also the whispers around them. Her glowing patterns flickered gently, not with fear but with careful control. "Not here," she said softly, her voice calm yet layered with emotions he could not name. Daniel nodded, following as she led him away from the noise and lights of the starport. They passed through narrow corridors and into a quiet chamber hidden deep within the station. The walls were simple, the room bare, yet Daniel felt as though he had stepped into a place sacred, a place heavy with unspoken stories. Leora turned to him at last, her gaze steady. Her presence was stronger than he remembered, and yet he could still see traces of the frightened girl who once clung to his promise. She took a slow breath, her eyes shimmering. "I never thought I would see you again," she whispered. "And yet, all these years I hoped." Daniel's throat tightened. "I searched for you," he said, his voice rough. "I followed rumors, shadows, anything that might lead me to you." He paused, his hands shaking. "I made a vow, Leora, and I meant it." Her lips trembled as she nodded. "I know," she whispered. "Your promise saved me." Daniel frowned. Confused, she stepped closer, her glowing markings brightening as if echoing her emotions. "When I was taken from the colony, I thought I would break," she said, her voice cracking. "I was sold again and again, treated as less than alive, but each time I closed my eyes, I remembered you. I remembered your words under the stars." Her eyes glistened with tears. "That promise was the only thing that told me I was more than chains, that someone saw me as a person, not as property." Daniel's heart clenched. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, but something in her posture held him back. She was no longer the helpless girl he once swore to protect. She was strong now, shaped by pain and survival. Leora lowered her gaze, her voice heavy. "But Daniel, you must understand. I am not the same girl you once knew." Silence filled the room. Daniel's chest burned with anticipation. "Who are you now?" he asked gently. Leora lifted her head, her eyes fierce yet sad. "I am free," she said firmly. "But my freedom came at a cost. I fought. I bled. I became part of a movement that rescues others from chains. People follow me, not because of who I was, but because of who I had to become." She drew in a sharp breath, her voice trembling. "I am not only Leora. I am a leader to those who have nothing. I carry their hope, their pain, their future." The words cut deep, yet they did not destroy him. Instead, they opened his eyes to the reality before him. He saw not only the girl he once vowed to marry, but the woman who carried the weight of countless lives. She had risen from the ashes of slavery, not only for herself, but for many others. Daniel's heart swelled with both love and respect. He took a deep breath, his voice steady. "I did not come all this way just to take you back to that promise," he said. His eyes locked on hers. "I came because I needed to find you, because I needed to keep my word. I told you I would never let you be a slave again. And seeing you now, I know you have freed yourself. But if you still want me by your side, not as a boy fulfilling a vow, but as a man who believes in you, then I will stand with you." Leora's breath caught. Her heart trembled at his words. She had carried his promise as a fragile light through years of darkness. But now she saw that the boy who gave it had become a man worthy of standing beside her. Still, fear lingered in her eyes. "If you stand with me, Daniel, you will face enemies greater than you can imagine," she warned. "Slavers, nobles, even councils that profit from chains. They will come for us, and they will not stop." Daniel's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. His eyes glowed with quiet determination. "I have spent my whole life preparing for this," he said. "I did not endure all these years to turn away now." Leora's tears finally fell. But they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release. She reached forward and took his hand, her glowing patterns lighting brighter than ever. In that moment, the room seemed to hum with power, a bond reforged not by innocence but by strength. For Daniel, the hidden truth was clear. The promise had saved her spirit, but her survival had shaped her into someone far greater. For Leora, the truth was that the vow she once clung to was no longer just about two children. It was about two souls who had endured and found each other again, not to repeat the past, but to change the future. A promise fulfilled, or transformed. The days following their reunion moved with a weight Daniel had never felt before. It was no longer just about a boy's vow spoken under the stars. It was about the future of countless lives chained across the galaxy. Leora had shown him the hidden truth of who she had become, and now Daniel faced a choice. Not whether to keep his promise, for he already had, but what that promise meant in the light of the destiny unfolding before them. He stayed by her side as she moved through the hidden camps of the freed. There, he saw with his own eyes the people who looked at her not just as a leader, but as a symbol. Children clung to her hands. Scarred warriors bowed their heads in respect, and broken families whispered her name with reverence. Leora was not simply one who had escaped. She was the heart of a movement that spread like fire across the stars. To them, she was proof that chains could be broken. At night, when the fires dimmed and the camps grew quiet, Daniel and Leora spoke in the shadows. They shared the memories of who they once were. laughing quietly at the innocence of their childhood vow. Yet beneath the laughter was something deeper. Their eyes carried the weight of longing, of years stolen, and of a bond that had endured even when galaxies separated them. One evening, as they sat near the edge of the camp looking at the stars, Daniel finally asked the question that had burned in him since the moment they met again. "Leora," he said softly, "do you still want me to keep the vow?" She turned her face toward the sky, her glowing patterns shimmering faintly in the dark. For a long time she did not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but filled with emotion. "The vow gave me hope when I was nothing. It gave me strength to survive. But now I am more than what I was. And so are you. If we bind ourselves to each other, it cannot just be for the promise of children. It must be for the promise of something greater." Daniel's heart pounded. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Then let it be both," he whispered. "Let it be for the child I once promised to save, and for the woman who became more than I ever dreamed. Let it be for us, and for the future we can build together." Her eyes shimmered with tears. She turned to him, her lips trembling into a smile. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe not only in hope, but in love. She leaned her forehead against his, their glowing patterns casting faint light across their faces. In that moment, the vow was reborn, not fragile, not innocent, but strong enough to carry the weight of entire worlds. But their story did not end with quiet affection. The galaxy was watching. The slavers had already heard whispers of Leora's growing influence, and soon their hunters descended upon the camps, armed with weapons and hatred. The night sky lit with fire as ships roared overhead. Daniel stood shoulder to shoulder with Leora, his blade and blaster steady. For the first time, he fought not only for his vow but for the cause she had built. Every strike, every move was fueled by the memory of the girl he once swore to protect and the woman who now stood as his equal. The battle was fierce. The air burned with smoke and screams. But Daniel and Leora fought together like two halves of the same flame. He shielded her when fire rained down. She led him through the chaos with unshaken resolve. To the freed people, their unity was like a beacon, showing them that love and strength together could defy the chains of cruelty. By dawn, the attackers were driven back. The camp stood battered but unbroken. The freed people lifted their heads with pride, and whispers spread like wildfire. Whispers of the boy who had kept his promise, whispers of the leader who had found her equal. Together, they were more than symbols. They were proof that destiny could be reshaped. After the battle, Leora stood at the center of the camp, her voice rising strong. "We are no longer slaves," she declared. "We are no longer shadows. We are a people, and together, with allies by our side, we will end the chains that bind us." Her glowing patterns flared bright, and Daniel stood beside her, silent but resolute in the eyes of the people. They were no longer just two figures reunited. They were a force that could change the galaxy. That night, when the fires burned low and silence returned, Leora turned to Daniel with a soft smile. "Do you see now?" she whispered. "Our promise was never only about us. It was about something greater." Daniel nodded, his heart full. "Yes," he said, "but it was also always about us, and it always will be." The stars stretched wide above them, the same stars under which a boy once vowed to a trembling girl. But now those stars bore witness to something transformed. The vow of children had become the promise of leaders, the bond of two souls who carried not only their love, but the hopes of many. And so their story moved forward, not ending with the reunion, but beginning anew. A promise fulfilled, a promise transformed, a promise strong enough to shake empires and light the darkness of the galaxy.